Community. Our commentator for this evening will be Juan. Juan is the President and General Counsel of Latino Justice. He's a constitutional and civil rights attorney who inspires change to systems that marginalize communities of color. And I now turn the program over to Juan.
Buenas, saludos.
Saludos.
It is a really rare treat that I have to be invited to give you some commentary and to also set up our special guest tonight here in the Centro del Estudio Puertorriqueño. So many thanks to Centro for hosting this conversation. Please. It only makes sense that the Centro would host this because the truth of the matter is that it owns the biggest archives of our Puerto Rican diaspora throughout all the outside of Puerto Rico. And it makes sense that they would find a way to give some space for this enormous accomplishment of the autobiography of Nelson Diaz. I am only going to touch upon a few points, and then Nelson will add some more commentary, and then we'll get some back and forth from you in the audience. And I've been whispering to him on the side that him and I have a lot more in common than I even knew. I'll save my commonality with you for a side conversation. But the fact of the matter is that in Nelson Diaz you have really a pioneer, and it's a major pioneer. I mean, to be the first Puerto Rican in all of Temple Law School, to be the first attorney in all of Philadelphia, to be the first White House fellow who's a Puerto Rican, to be the first general counsel for HUD, to be the first elected Puerto Rican ever to serve on the bench in any court in all of Pennsylvania, is just an amazing accomplishment. And I can keep going with the number of firsts that he has done. But the fact of the matter is you are looking at an incredibly accomplished life that in the book, when you read the book, is really settled on the fact that he was guided by his mother. And Nelson would be the first to tell you that he would be nowhere without his mother. Without his mother, Maria, who protected him like crazy when they were living in the Bronx, who made sure he got home for that curfew at 6 o'clock, who made sure he was able to do everything he had to do, who pushed him and pushed him. And near the end of her life, made sure that she had el vasito de orange slices, de naranja, waiting for him no matter what time he got home. And that's an incredible story, that at the forefront, in the background, and at every level of foundation, there was a Puerto Rican woman making sure that her son did what she wanted him to do. In Nelson Diaz, you also have living history of the violent levels of racism in this country. You have living history. You know, we think about the history of racism in this country as if it happened on black and white TV sometime in the 50s and 40s and 60s, and then somehow evaporated whenever we got color TV, whenever the hell that is. And you think that the whole country actually does not understand, does not have, like, eso es tiempo pasado, right? That must have been my great-grandparents who went through that. No, in Nelson Diaz, you had a person who had a cross being burned on his house. Burned, to try to scare him away from his house in East Hampton, New Jersey, right by Mount Holly, New Jersey. Burning a cross, the same symbol of the Ku Klux Klan. In Nelson Diaz, you have a person who fought when he was at HUD with Henry Cisneros to fight the Klan from forcing out blacks who were finally allowed to live in public housing in a small town called Vidor, Texas. And they held a rally when they scared the blacks off the public housing. And the Ku Klux Klan held a rally called Victory in Vidor. And because of efforts by people like Nelson Diaz, they were able to finally get black folk to live in public housing and integrate public housing in Texas. In Nelson Diaz, you had the occasional witnessing of white folk calling us spics, which is very common, of course, for all of us who grew up in a certain generation. But dirty spick and wide hoe, and I can't deal with you people because some black Puerto Rican stole my wife, and that's going to affect my decision making in the future. This is just tale upon tale of racist hate. That he is a living example of resistance too. And that's an amazing story as well. Now, mind you, he was a public service. So in public service, you got to take a lot of flack, right? You take stuff, you take shit. You better not. He's part of a group of people who fired 500 workers. Oh man, they called him a banana republic dictator for that one. He had to make decisions in public service that are not always easy to make, but he made those decisions. And he was the city solicitor, which is the main attorney for a big city. In this case, of course, back in Philadelphia. And those decisions were being made foremost by his perspective of what had to be done to shake up bureaucracies and make sure they work. So I got 2 more episodes for you, and 2 kind of clusters of episodes that I want to share with you. So Nelson, yes, he was on the board of Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, and I have the privilege, the honor of heading up Latino Justice Pearl Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. Nelson told me this years ago. He told me that I served on the board, Juan, and I was really, really gung-ho about the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund because I wanted him to open up an office in Philadelphia. And when he found out that Cesar wasn't interested in an office in Philadelphia, he said, "Pal carajo, me voy. I don't need you guys anymore. I'm gonna do it myself." And like us in the office in New York, we worked on lawsuits together to make sure the voting rights were respected of people in Philadelphia, of the Puerto Ricans in Philadelphia, making sure bilingual assistance was available to people in Philadelphia. And Nelson carried that legacy on, bringing lawsuits before and after the kind of engagement of the Puerto Rican community in Philadelphia. You know, the level of racist hate that I told you before that Nelson had to endure and also deal with also extended to his amazing role in addressing the outrageous racist crime of the killing of the Santiago family in Feltonville, Philadelphia. So I've read quite a bit about Philly. I've worked in Philly myself. I've done lawsuits there. And I know from the writings of people like Carmen Diaz, people like Victor Vasquez, people who studied Philadelphia for a long time, colegas of ours, and I knew about this episode of a firebomb being thrown to the apartment that killed like 4 people in the entire family, the Santiago family. And efforts by Nelson Diaz to make sure that the police didn't railroad a defendant into accepting a guilty plea when that defendant was mentally challenged, led to the capturing of the real killer of that particular night. So we think about these times of racist hate. We got a crazy man in the White House, and he reminds us of this stuff every day. But there seems to be this like lost chapter of memorias. And in many ways, Nelson bridges all that gap. So, as an attorney who does civil rights work, I'm extremely proud as well of the fact that Nelson played a major role in ensuring that the guarantee of equal housing, fair housing, is also available to those of us who bring these lawsuits on behalf of what we call a disparate impact theory. So give me 1 second so I can break down those words. Disparate impact basically means that I can sue a government because the result of their actions discriminate against a people. The results of their actions exclude and discriminate against people. I don't have to sit there and show that the head of my public housing authority is a racist, that he or she said racist things. I just show that the exclusion, at the end of the day, impacts our people more than others, and there's no justification for it. And that standard for Title VIII is still alive today because of the work that Nelson did when he was at HUD, working under the leadership of Henry Cisneros. So there's a lot of still living, breathing legacies of the work of Mr. Diaz. I'll end with 2 more points. There's a wonderful reference in this chapter. I'd love to hear you talk about it more. Nelson is on a trip, a delegation of Latino leaders somewhere in another part of the world, and he was being told that, oh yeah, you guys are here with the biggest Latino leader of the United States, Raúl Izaguirre. Now, those of you who may know the name, Mr. Izaguirre, former ambassador to El Salvador, former amazing leader of a major organization called La Raza at the time, National Council of La Raza, had a lot of prominence. And my man Nelson said, Kumi, I don't remember asking Mr. Isaguirre to be my leader. So it's like the kind of like level of activism that basically said to him, to everyone who wants to listen, that we don't need un cacique. We need multiple female, amazing leaders, male and female, to represent all of us. I really was very, very enamored with that particular episode. Wow. Mr. Diaz doesn't stop, right? Sara, es verdad.
Es verdad.
¿Verdad? Sara knows. The guy just does stop. He is what now? You in the early 70s? Right? Watch. I hear they're looking for somebody to run for president in 2020. I mean, the guy ran for mayor when he was actually literally just a couple of years ago. He does not stop. When you read the book, you'll understand why, by the way. And I want you to read the book to understand why he doesn't stop. But here's what we can benefit from. That his commitment to our gente, and his commitment to bettering the lives of our gente, his commitment to public service is really unparalleled. Really, really is. Decades and decades and decades of work. Leaving private practice at a very lucrative position as partners of major law firms to go back to become city solicitor, to go back to work in public service. These tales are not very common. Public service is common among our people, but to do it for so long, at a level of such a quality level that Nelson Diaz has done, and to continue to do it, and I'm sure he wants to do it again, Sarah. Mi gente, te presento el señor, the Honorable Nelson Diaz.
Thank you so much. We don't write our stories. The stories are all written by many other communities. How many Holocaust movies have you seen? How many Puerto Rican movies have you seen? Nothing about the struggles and how we changed and contributed to this society in a great way. And all they say is, pasamos por aquí, because they always tell their stories to aggrandize themselves. It isn't the fact that Juan is taking a miserable salary, working his tail off, trying to change the civil rights of our community. Well, they give all the credit to a former Senator, Jacobs, who essentially just on the board and gave you support. He didn't go out there and work it day by day. And to some extent, that is such an important concept. And my motivation for writing it, obviously, I want my kids to see that we came by here, that we were in Philadelphia, made a contribution. We were in New York and made a contribution. We weren't totally rapists and robbers, as this president wants to portray all Latinos. Now you say, well, Puerto Ricans, they don't treat the same way. Well, if you look at Maria and you read the story, to him, a Latino is a Latino wherever he or she may be. Doesn't matter that you are citizens of Puerto Rico or you are citizens of Mexico, they're all the same to him. In fact, as you know, there's a chapter in the book that I really wanted to share because los puertorriqueños de la isla don't believe that they're colonialists. They don't believe they're being treated that way. And one of the things that I want to emphasize and look at here is that it is embedded in us. 400 years under Spanish rule and 100 plus years under US rule, and the only thing we vote for is status. It's the only thing we vote for. We don't vote for the competency of the individual, the capability of who's going to run or who's going to manage. Si es independentista, you vote that way. Si no es independentista, you vote Commonwealth. If you're not Commonwealth, then you're a statehooder. And we who come here who don't give a damn about those issues and want to go back to Puerto Rico to help our people, no somos de allá. And we have had such experiences. Now, I was out of Fortune 66 company for 12 years, the largest utility in the United States. The most efficient, the utility that has not been able to get to Puerto Rico to help, even though I was on the board and they offered the help. Why? Because some nice guy on the organization thought that he knew better than Nelson Diaz. So he says, I don't need you. So I leave. And he hires someone for $300 million in Montana who has absolutely 2 or 3 people. Now, that's not unique in what they do. If I can read in terms of what they do. The Puerto Rican power grid was flimsy and decrepit, just waiting for a hurricane to put it out of its misery. There were things we could have done, things we had long needed to do. I had strong relationships at Exelon, the largest and best-run utility company in the United States, and they were ready to help, but their help was not wanted. The board was busy figuring out which consultants would win the contracts. Even so, the reactions of the federal government and Puerto Rican government was disappointing. The executive director of PREPA signed a $300 million contract with a 2-man energy company from Montana and was fired. His 72-year-old replacement wasn't Puerto Rican and was not from here or from there. He was from one of the islands and happened to be an American. Que habla inglés. Spoke little Spanish, was paid a huge $450,000 salary, and lasted 4 months. His replacement lasted only a day. And he resigned, and when the governor demanded that he lower his salary from $750,000, a week later, they appointed Jose Ortiz, who was hired $250,000. Now, this is a company, and those of you who know Puerto Rico, which is as large as any large company, 3 million customers. And they had not put a dime into the company. When I went, they had a $500 million cash flow, which means they could have fixed it. And those who were in the finance, they had the same lawyer for 35 years from Chicago who approved all the bond financing. 35 years, same lawyer. And when the stock went down on his financing, he left the law firm, started his own firm, and he's still signing the same letters of opinion to use the money for operations when they hadn't put a dime in. And if you're reading the book, the prior governor spent $43 million on a consultant, a firm from here called Cleary, Blanquitos, y una mujer blanquita also running the operation. Do you know what they did? Zero. When I came in, I asked them, how are you going to replace these individuals that you are having work here with ours? Are you training them? They would not give us an answer. I asked to fire them, got an extra month. We finally fired them, and things went back to normal again. It is so sad how we know what was needed. We know what they wanted, but Puerto Rico couldn't see that we, people who care about them, would do something for them. Instead, just raise money for us after the storm. Before the storm, I called the then director, told them, look, sir, usually when there's a disaster, you prepare, and you prepare with your agencies. We have on the private sector called EEI, the Edison Electrical System. The government agencies have their own agencies. And you call them and you say, let's prepare for this storm. And if something catastrophic happens, they volunteer and they go out, and you don't have to make any contracts, and they're supervised by either the federal government or the Corps of Engineers. Just what happened when in New Orleans when they didn't respond and their general took over. I predicted at the time, and it's in papers, that it would take them 11 months to get their lights back. I was off by a month. Took them 12 months to get their lights on. It is so disastrous to see how we love our island, we love our people, we want to do the best. We've worked for our people all our lives. And for some system that they obviously don't accept our advices. Now, You can call it whatever you want to call it, but I call it colonialism. Some people call it corruption, some people call it other things, but it's colonialism. It's the fact that, hey, los que están allá no saben lo que tenemos nosotros acá, y los que estamos aquí no saben lo que tenemos allá. Now, when we're here, and you'll read the book, how we get discriminated. I couldn't get into college, let alone law school, because of pre-affirmative action. Now, I found 10 students, once I took over the law school under the Black Law Student Association, 10 Latinos, 9 out of 10 graduated, when 2/3 of the students flunked out at Temple. And 10 out of 9 passed and are practicing law today. Some are judges, one was an ambassador, Maria Carmen Aponte, was an ambassador. Others have really had distinguished lives. When I got to Philadelphia, there were only 67 African-American lawyers that had passed the bar since 1776, in 1972. 67 lawyers, African-Americans. Not one Latino had ever passed the bar. And there's no reciprocity at the time. So no Latino could come in. Now, New York at least has 75 lawyers when I got out. New Jersey had 3 or 4. But African Americans, Latinos couldn't get into Pennsylvania. I thought it was the South. It's the North. And here we are. And if it wasn't for the changing of the discriminatory practices. Now, the guy who recruited me got the best investment of all. After I took over the law school, the law dean resigned. The man became the dean, Peter Leocoris. 4 years later, he became the president of the university for 16 years. He got a great investment out of it. And as a result, I could never leave Temple. I wanted to come home to New York, and I could never leave Temple. Now, the story that I have here, I'm sure many of you have. Ricardo Oquenda, we've spoken. Same story. Juan, same story. We have it, but no one knows our story. Se creen que venimos por fumado to become a judge. You know, we were always made to be there. And it's so important that our children see that it takes struggle and it takes obligation. Now, he talked about my mother chasing me. I played baseball, and it's in the book, in Harlem with 23 African-American ball players and me. And Gabrielle knows our community, right on PS 125. I was Mr. Baseball Player, so if any Puerto Rican knew a Puerto Rican child, they would know me, including my wife knew who I was. That's why she chased me for 30 years. You know? Anyway, I tell everybody the reason we won the league every year is because we had 23 African-American ball players and 1 Latin American ball player. It was me. And that's what they won every year. We were at Columbia Park, and it was a way of keeping me off the streets. Now, this guy, this man, was unemployed, lived on the streets of Harlem. And if you remember, there used to be a fish and chip place across the street from St. Joe's. We used to give him quarters so he could live off fish and chips. And he would sell us Converse sneakers for $10. Now,
Chuck Taylors.
Yep. I tried to see him years later, and fortunately I found out that he got hired by the Church of the Master to do the same thing he was doing for free all those years. He had a house in Jersey in the suburbs, you know, and he died very well. And so it was really such a relief to see a man who should have been repaid many times.
Can I ask you real quickly? Let's just talk about that. So, what is it about?
You told all the stories, so they don't have to read the book anymore, man.
What is it about your exposure to that coach in baseball, to sports in general, that gave you some life lessons?
The important there was, one, group dynamics, being able to operate as a group and knowing where you could contribute.
Like team first.
That was the best second baseman you could find, you know, double play combination, and I was not a big-time hitter like you, but, I could hit over a couple of singles, doubles, and triples. And it was, his scope was, just get your bat on the ball. You don't know what the other team's gonna do. Get the hit, and the team may make an error, and you'll get on. And so the approach was, go move forward all the time. I loved baseball, my whole life. It was 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night till my mother chased me with my bat to get home, Also, the relationships I made. And we had the best pitcher in the world, and you would see him smoking pot all the time. He's smoking pot, and we were talking about 12, 13-year-old kids smoking pot. And now we find out that pot wasn't so bad,
It wasn't so bad back then either. Just saying. Nelson, so, I did talk about lacrosse. That was a very, very powerful, a few pages of your book. I'm sure I'm not doing it justice, so why don't you elaborate? What did you feel? What was going through your head?
Let me tell you that I felt safer in Harlem than I felt in Philadelphia. I felt I could walk up and down 125th Street and no one was going to kick my butt because they knew I would kick back. And so there was a comfortable relationship. I go to Philadelphia. The year after I graduated from law school, I bought a house in 1806 Albert Street on the other side of the railroad tracks. The house lasted 1 weekend. I went to closing on Friday, and Sunday I got called from the Human Relations Commission with helicopters all over the house that they had torn the house down because they thought a Puerto Rican or black family was moving into that house. The house is the 1806 Albert Street is still there. No one's ever been rebuilt on it. I gave them the property, to the community, the property back when I became a judge in '81. So I held it for 10 years and felt, being a judge, I shouldn't own dilapidated properties, So that was one experience. As you know from reading the book, there was a young kid by the name of Julio Osorio, and that's how I really got to be the lawyer for the community. Julio Osorio, I was a public defender. Julio Osorio lived on that other side of that railroad tracks. He was a little disabled. The white kids ran him off the Delaware River, and he drowned. I then demanded from the mayor, and there was Frank Rizzo at the time, who is a very famous policeman. He was a mayor. Demanded from the mayor that we have a Latino in the administration. We got our first Latino vice principal, a kid that had graduated from there, Puerto Rican kid, Jose Lebron. That we have crossing guards so that they wouldn't be chased back and forth, and some educational issues. So we demanded that stuff. Well, we're doing the demand. The priest, you remember the priest?
Mm-hmm.
The priest, an Irish priest by the name of Father Craven, thought he was Puerto Rican, so él decía que era de ay bonito. And he was an incredible force who really helped us when I represented the Young Lords Party. He helped us, he felt good about us, so the agitators were not bad people to him. They were just people. And so he told the mayor, look, don't you understand that the community's going on fire? The mayor stands up and is about to hit the priest. I stand between the priest and him, and I said, Mr. Mayor, the guy's a priest, you hit him, you don't know what's gonna happen to you. He thanked me for the rest I'm 26 years old, I'm a young kid. He thanked me for the rest of his life, to the extent that I would criticize him to death in public. He'd put me on any advisory committee, gave me support for economic development in North Philadelphia, and I hated the guy. I had a guy run against him in '75, Charlie Bowser, the first African American to run, and he still Well, so I guess he realized that he may have gone to hell if he had hit the priest, you know?
There came a point in time when you ran for judgeship, right? So, you know, in the audience we have people here from New York, we have people here from New Jersey, of course, and people here from Pennsylvania. Not every jurisdiction does it the same way. For example, in New Jersey, all the judges are appointed. So the only way you get influence to become a judge is to convince the mayor, the county exec, or the governor to bless you and make you a judge. But you had to run for office as a judge. And was that your first time that you ran for office?
Yeah, you know, being naive sometimes is a
Helps.
blessing.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
a blessing. I had run Charlie Bowser's campaign in '75, and we had 10,000 volunteers, and all we could give them was a bunch of dimes to call us if something would happen. It was a time of activism and civil rights and a caring process. There was a guy by the name of Luis Diaz, not the one that's here, who was a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, who had made some advocacy. He ran a Puerto Rican project and had advocated that there be a diversity on the courts. So the governor calls me, and so I go visit the governor, who happened to be a Republican, Thornburg, and said, you know, people think, you know, you're the senior member of the Latino bar, 9 years. So you can see there were very few people who had more than 9 years experience. Mm-hmm. And you had to have at least 10 really to get on the bar, become a judge in those days. So he said he would appoint me. I wait. The primary's coming, and I have heard nothing from the governor. I learned what it is about later on, but I don't. At the time, you know, you're naive. So I filed, and when I filed, I allegedly have the party support and everybody else. Well, everybody remembered my 1806 Albert Street. I got wiped out in the white areas and got 99% of the black vote and got a pocket of an area in which I made such a fuss because I didn't know any better. They had ballots, and my ballots didn't have my name. So I pulled the ballots out of her all for, and people got so excited that they knew who I was, because people don't know who the judges are who run. They don't know one guy from the other. And I was fortunate to be elected, and then the governor appoints me 2 weeks later after I got elected. I don't need him anymore. So I started earlier than I would have started otherwise, and that's all was the benefit of it, but he got his name on my credentials.
Did there come a time in which you thought you could stay as a judge for the rest of your career?
Yes. That was probably the job that I felt the most secure and the best job that I had. But when I got appointed by the Supreme Court to administer the court, because it was backlogged 7 years, in other words, if you had an accident case, you could never get results for 7 years. Or if you had a criminal case, you were probably sitting in jail for 2 years before your trial came to determine whether you're innocent. So I took over the court system, and like you indicated, I fired 500 people because there were 4 or 5 people in a courtroom. Everyone was saying, you know, it's your job, your job, your job. So by 500, everybody realized that it was their job. And they all started to work. I took all of the judges, I had 90 judges under me, and I put them all to do criminal work. So we took care of the criminal backlog, and I ran the civil system with volunteers, lawyers like you, to sit as judges. I appoint them as masters. The only person that didn't know the person wasn't a judge was probably the 2 lawyers. But everybody else, the juries and so forth, thought that this person was a judge. And we reduced the backlog in 18 months to 2 years. And the reason is that those of us who know anything about civil practice, 90% of cases settle. So you just got to get them in front of a judge because they're going to settle. And you force that issue, and that enabled us to get rid of the backlog. And it's never been backlogged again. And it's been a great system today, and we have Latinos on the bench today.
How old were you when you went to D.C. as a White House fellow?
I started at 29 and got sworn in at 30. So I was the second youngest.
And when you were working there, and you mentioned this in the book, but tell the audience, who really influenced you the most?
It was unbelievable because I didn't know until I started to write the book how much he had influenced me. Vice President Mondale, I was assigned to him, and I got the issues of Latinos, veterans, and all the charities. So I take a piece of paper, and I had a bunch of people come visit me, Federico Peña, Maria, who was up at the state of New York upstairs, who was our biggest bilingual person in the state. They came to visit me. They said, look, we got to get a bilingual education bill through. So I said, okay, no problem. I write a letter, send it to the Secretary of Education, assistant to the Vice President of the United States. The bill gets through. Nobody even know that had anything to do with it. They think it was the Vice President. And President Carter includes it in his State of the Message. A kid comes to me who has ADA issues, and he says, look, I want the buses to come to me, not for them to pick me up on these transport buses. I want them to be available, accessible. I write a letter to the transportation guy. He changed the bus activity. One day, I bring all the Latino leaders from throughout the country to see me. And I had Vilma Martinez, who was your counterpart at MALDEF, to help me create the list. First time I had met Vilma, but I knew in terms of civil rights, he was a person who had credibility. So I bring all the people in. One guy from Texas criticizes me in the newspaper at the fact, who the hell he thinks he is, he brings everybody, they didn't invite me and so forth. So I said, oh my God, what the hell did I do? So I go up to the Vice President and tell him what happened. He says, let me have the list. He takes the list, and I figured, I don't know what he's gonna do with it. He invites everybody but that guy, and has a meeting with them personally, with all the Latino leaders. And they thought I was king then. And he took the labor leaders and put them in the cabinet room, had meetings with them. There was never a Latino working in the White House, working on Latino issues before. That was the issue. So I had a guy by the name of Rick Hernandez, who was a politico, and I was supposed to be non-political. And so I asked him, let's go meet with the Vice President, ask him that we need somebody in the White House to work on Latino issues, because it was starting to grow. We were only about 2-3 million at the time. And they got a person who was then ambassador. They brought him in. He hired a Puerto Rican, a Mexican. Some of the people that he hired have become cabinet members, like Solis and so forth. There's never been, since that time, not one person that has not worked on Latino issues in the White House. And how the heck did I know that that was gonna be sort of the thing? And if you don't ask, you don't get. And what were they gonna do with me? Fire me? I go back home. Right. And they would have let me at least finish my year off. They knew to get rid of me in a year. And to some extent, I learned so much from him because he was a very loyal man to Jimmy Carter. And so I learned so much from him that sometimes you have to walk a couple of feet backwards before you walk a couple of feet forward. And I used to sue everybody, education sued. I sued the Civil Service Commission because the Latinos couldn't get into the Civil Service Commission. I sued everybody. And, the relationship with you guys and me, right, that was a way to work. Sure. But I learned that sometimes there are opportunities that one has to politically work on, that you can have to walk a few steps back and forth before you get the benefit for our communities.
Last question, then we'll open this up to anybody else. There came a point in your career where you finally started working in private practice, right? And these were significantly large firms in Philadelphia.
I'll tell you why.
You're finally there. You're finally, leveraging, para no decir explotar, because leveraging your contacts, which were many, and you're making some coin. And then you go back to become city solicitor. What was up with that?
Let me tell you what happened. When I was at HUD, I settled 23 civil rights lawsuits against the Justice Department wishes and used the Budget Department money of HUD, $9 billion. One of the cases was a Puerto Rican defense fund in Holyoke, by the way. Was one of the cases where they wanted to give you a couple of certificates. Like, it was just a few Puerto Ricans they moved out. They moved out the whole freaking place out. And luckily, you guys knew better. And so I settled all of these lawsuits, and the Justice Department wanted to have me fired. They met with Secretary Cisneros, because I held them in contempt of court, the Justice Department, in one of the cases. I was in Texas, not far from Vida, and this I'm running this thing, so I take the second chair. I sit in the courtroom, unlike most general counsels, and I throw my pencil, and the judge says, "What's wrong? Let's take a recess." We go to the side and says, "Look, my lawyer is not arguing what my secretary wants us to argue. We want to argue that we discriminated against those people," and he's trying to defend the discrimination. And he said, "Well, I'm holding them in contempt." So he held the Justice Department in contempt, which meant, fire Nelson Diaz. Luckily, Henry was very supportive, and he said, he's doing exactly what I asked him to do. And it was a tough part, fighting your own Justice Department instead of trying to get what was really necessary to fix the housing. And so when I had that freedom, after that occurred, I could settle any case. So I told the congressman in Chicago, "Sue me so I can get you some money." So he sued me, and because it was all African American, it was all African American settlements. You remember that big case in Illinois, and their big case had been going on for 5 or 6 years, and I had given them about $1.2 billion already to Chicago, and they were doing anything with the Latinos. So I told the Congressman Gutierrez, "Sue us, man." So he sued us, so we were able to fix some areas in Humboldt Park. And so the Assistant Secretary of Public Health said, "All you gotta do is sue and Nelson will get you some money." But it was a wonderful period of time where I think we helped more poor people. We got rid of high rises in all the, because everybody wants to copy New York. They don't work everywhere. They don't work in Baltimore. They don't work in Dallas. There's plenty of land. They were isolated. Properties were totally isolated from schools and transportation. One of them was in a smell factory. 12 years under litigation, still in a smell factory. Nothing but single women with parents. And then I created the Diaz opinion, which is nobody wanted to write it. Because I said, "Is it prohibited by law?" They said, "Well, it's not allowed by law." "Well, it's not prohibited by law, we can do it."
Talking about public-private
Yeah,
partnerships.
public-private financing, which essentially allowed us, in today's environment, which would have been tough, to continue to maintain public housing because they're in market rate areas and they're available. Now, you guys got a big problem in New York. A lot of it has to do with management more than anything else.
Any questions, comments, observations?
Yeah, I read your book, Nelson. I thought it was really excellent.
Thank you.
And
What's your name, sir?
my name's Ira Glauber, and you're in New York, and I thought it would be good if the people in this room could hear about your childhood. I found that to be the most interesting part of your book. Of course, all the political things you said was very interesting, but maybe you can tell us about your childhood and just go chronologically and tell us about where you grew up and where you went to school and things like that. And the people from New York, I think, will appreciate that more than what you did in Philadelphia.
Like I said, I'm the prodigal son. Let me read from here. My mother had left Puerto Rico holding tight to the migrant's dream of a better life in the mainland United States. But soon as she was confronted with the reality many like her face when they arrived in New York City, life wasn't much better stateside, and in some ways, it was the worst. A tenement in the 1950s was not a good place to live, especially if you're raising children. And I can tell you, it's terrible if you're a child yourself. My first memories are from that little, overcrowded, rat-infested building. My mother and stepfather shared one bedroom. Cookie, my sister, had the other, and I slept in the sofa in the living room. There was always somebody in my house. There seemed to be enough there wasn't to be, and I don't, let me see, I need some light, man.
Enough room.
Yeah.
Good enough.
There's some room, and it wasn't, at least, where's my reading glasses, man?
Si quieres luz acá. yo tengo
Yeah, dame luz.
Estos teléfonos tienen todo. ¿no?
Dame la luz. That's better. The five-story tenement building was close to where the elevator on Broadway was, and right in the middle of the changing neighborhood. West Harlem had been Irish, but with the arrival of so many Latinos, it was now in transition. And the transition was tense. The Broadway musical West Side Story, in which a Romeo and Juliet tragedy is placed, are the real ethnic story of the street gangs in the Puerto Rican community, the Puerto Rican Sharks, and the Jets in West Harlem neighborhood. And you got a beautiful picture of me here, you know, with my mother trying to celebrate my 5th birthday. So my formative years started there, started in the Bronx. We went to the Acero, we went to the Broadway, and then they were knocking down the Manhattanville projects. Before they built them, they were knocking those buildings down. I also talk about Robert Moses and what he got away with. Robert Moses, if you read his book, there was, every mayor was afraid of him. And he did whatever he wanted to do, which to some extent benefited me, but it hurt a lot of people who were moved from those tenements, and there was no relocation assistance in those days. They just left. And then from there, I winded up in the projects. I was a little Boy Scout, and the only Boy Scout story I can tell you is that my mother was not happy to put me in the Boy Scouts because they didn't want me to go anywhere overnight. I went to Alpine, and Alpine, I learned how to make a fire, but I dropped all the hot dogs in the ground, you know, so I just picked them up and ate them that way. I saw my first bear. I ran like I could never see, because I knew how to run away from cops. Up and down 125th Street, I got arrested many times. At one time, there was a gang fight near Junior High School 43. And Junior High School 43, when I got arrested, they took me in, and there was an African-American guy, the first African-American cop that I had ever seen. All the cops were La Jara. And then I found out later on that La Jara was O'Hara. I had no idea that I thought La Jara was a real word for cops. And you learn, and, you know, we all, as kids, we always thought that was, hey, ahí viene La Jara, you know. And there was this pal guy who had seen me play baseball up at Columbia Field. Police Athletic League. And I have to tell you that he said, this is a good boy. Why did you arrest him? You know, I told him I was innocent. I wasn't, you know, I just had the thing in my hand. That's all it was. And because of him, they let me go, and I didn't get a criminal record, which would have probably stopped me from going on. And I knew Louis Alvarez when he was a stock boy. If I had gotten arrested for the things that I did, and had those kind of records, or went to juvenile system, when I went to Rice High School, I had a teacher, and you remember, I'm illiterate in 2 languages. He's talking about people putting their hands in their pockets. I had no idea what the heck he's talking about. Well, because I said, you have your hands in your pockets. You know, I figured, you know, it's a laziness, so forth. Well, he was probably talking about people masturbating or whatever it was. I had no idea he was talking about that. And and he flunked me in 3 courses. Imagine. And then Ricardo Oquendo, it wasn't until he was 21 years old that he finally got his act together, right? Well, how old were you, Ricardo?
I'm gonna be 60 and I still don't have my act.
Well, Ricardo has a very, very, very great story, as does Juan, and I just want you all to write your stories so that people realize that Ana Carbonell, you didn't become a TV star just like that. You had to do something that had to struggle, because they didn't want you on the TV. Somebody had to complain. Somebody had to put a license requirement issue. Somebody like the Puerto Rican Defense Fund was on top of their noses about whether or not they will have diversity in the, those kinds of things happen and open doors for us. Otherwise, because we as Puerto Ricans decide to say, ay bendito, gracias por lo que tenemos, and we contribute so much to the society, whether it's 1917, the war, and I talk about this Jones Act, whether it's all the taxes we pay because of the Jones Act, whether it's all, we are treated worse than they treat Mexico, the country, worse than they treat Israel, the country, and I can go on and on and on, and we take it. When our governor says only 6 people died or 16 people died when there were 4,000 people that died in that storm, that is insulting to any other. If the lights had gone out more than 1 month in Pennsylvania, there would have been riots. And here we live 11 months. All I want you to do is to learn from these experiences. The fact that I succeeded was not because I said I'm going to take it. The reason I succeeded is because I was a pain in the butt to whoever told me no.
There you go.
Whether it was the university who said, hey, you got to get reading lessons, or whether it was getting on corporate boards. I got on a corporate board when there were only 2 Puerto Ricans, both de la isla, on corporate boards. Ferrer and Carrion, on a Fortune 100 board. Now, I wasn't the likely one to get it, but I insisted for 30 years till I got it. And when I got it, I walked away from them. I don't need you. I walked away from $3 million, but you gotta do what you gotta do, what you think is important. And at that time, I ran for mayor because of the education system. We have to do something because we're gonna lose our community. You know that 80% of all immigrants, Latino immigrants, graduate from high school. In Philadelphia, 50% of the kids drop out of high school. So you're not even getting close to 10% graduating from high schools, and it's all Puerto Ricans. While you see the people who come here from Mexico, Central America, and everybody else, 80% of them get through. Why do we have to take the worst situations that they are? That makes me suffer. It makes me cry, and I can't take it. And so I got to do something. Nobody else is going to do anything about it. And so the book is basically to say to you, please let others know that you didn't get there because anybody gave you a thing. You got there because you struggled as an American citizen to get what we have gotten. So I need others to write the story. It took me 3 years because I'm not as articulate as some of you all, but it was a painful 3 years when you go through what my mother went through. My mother left her house at 9 years old, became a maid in San Juan at 9 years old because she was afraid her father was going to beat the hell out of her because anytime he came to the house, he beat them. One of her 14 siblings died of hunger. My aunts and uncles would steal food from his Paramour so that they could live and eat. My grandmother, who died young after having 14 children, had a gun in the back of a pillow so that she could protect herself and her kids. When I went to visit her, they didn't live that well in El Campo de Vega Alta, Corea, which was a town. It is an incredible lucha que tuvieron esa gente en los 40, 50, because it was right, the Depression occurred, things were manufacturing started, they took all the people out of agriculture in Puerto Rico. Agriculture totally died in the 40s and 50s. No querían la azúcar nuestra, querían la azúcar de Cuba ahora. So que se jodan los puertorriqueños. And that's how we died, and that's why the people, my mother came in the Marine Tiger. Anybody know anything about the Marine Tiger?
Yes.
150,000 Puerto Ricans came in the Marine Tiger. I did the history on the Marine Tiger. it was a cargo ship. Then it became a warship that transported soldiers. Then it became the ship that transported 150,000 Puerto Ricans. The largest migration of Puerto Ricans to the United States came on that ship. They paid $100 a trip, and it was not a carnival. You had a seat like this one here. You sat there in a row, and if you got up from the seat, somebody would steal your clothes, your food, and it was a 5-day cruise. And then they got here and they didn't realize how cold it was. My mother came September 5th, right after Labor Day. So you can imagine how cold they felt in su cosita pequeña. And then who was going to pick them up when they were or where they were going? And usually nobody was there because they didn't know when the ship was going to get there. It is a story of a suffering, tough community, made American citizens, and I appreciate my citizenship, but the important thing for you is that what have we done with it? It is now 100 and some years. It is not like new immigrants. It is an opportunity that I hope you tell your story so that others can begin telling it. Juan, you need to tell the story.
You have a question? Yes. One last question here, then we're going to open it up so that Nelson can talk to you one-on-one with the book.
Hi, good evening. Nicole Torres-Bruno. I'm an activist and humanitarian, very involved with the relief efforts still happening in Puerto Rico. I commend you, your leadership, and all that you continue to do. My viewpoint now is circulating back to our motherland. The Cofina hearing, okay? The Cofina bonds.
Yeah.
Judge Swain, we had 1 out of 3 sessions, just happened on November 20th. The second one is scheduled for December 20th in San Juan. I'm asking you, are you involved? How could we, from your advanced opinion, how could the public get involved and gain knowledge? And how could we propose that this debt be audited before the changing of the guards? Because there seems to be a rush to have this decision finalized before year end. And of course, we all know the changing of the guards is happening in January. So it's always this Republican versus Democratic push-pull. But it's not just. It continues to be unfair. So what's your opinion? What could we do?
I was looking for the area, and you'll read about why we're in the state we're in with those bonds. In 1984, a senator from North Carolina by the name of Strom Thurmond took Puerto Rico out of the Bankruptcy Act. If Congress would treat us like they treat every other state under the Bankruptcy Act, they could. If they treated us like they did under the Bankruptcy Act, you wipe up the debt, like they did in Detroit, like they did in Orange County. Now, they want to treat us differently in terms of the worth of those bonds, most of whom have been sold back to islanders, most of whom were being given at 6% when you had no bonds here greater than 2%.
Correct. So it's almost like a Ponzi scheme.
It is a Ponzi scheme.
I know it is.
And I offered this governor, talk about no somos de aquí, no somos allá. I offered this governor, Senator Casey from Pennsylvania, was willing to introduce a bill to put a guarantee on all the bonds as a federal bonds, and the interest rate would go down from 6 to 2%. Why? Because the guarantee of the United States, just like they did in Washington, D.C., when they had their problem. They don't want to hear it. Now the government comes around and creates this board, Promesa, which has absolutely not one person who really cares about anything but the fact that they want these bonds paid somehow from some source of money. Right, some source, that's right, some source of money. They're not willing to cut them. What should happen is all of that should be written off.
Yes, exactly.
And Puerto Rico should start again. And now, why do they treat us differently? Because in Philadelphia, there is less than 11% of the Puerto Ricans that come out to vote. In New York City, there's less than 15% of the Puerto Ricans that come out to vote. So I'd rather have the Dominicans than have the Puerto Ricans. That's why you have a congressman, because they're coming out to vote and they're participating in the process. We don't participate in the process because we say, hey, como no soy de aquí, tú sabes, todos son pillos. Va a Puerto Rico, and they vote 90% for something that's totally irrelevant. Now, how do you change the mentality of our people to demand while they're here? You know that they could have elected me mayor in Philadelphia if only the Puerto Ricans had come out. Only the Puerto Ricans alone had come out to vote. But they have no sense of feeling that todos somos pillos, no matter who it is. And I wasn't a politician. But we all get categorized in the same way. And they may be pillos, but that doesn't mean that you don't participate in the process and make things positive to change. And the only way we're going to get Congress to care about us is when somebody is willing to take them on. And I wouldn't pay the loans back. This governor doesn't want to pay the loans back. Nobody, and they're never going to be able to pay them. You know why? Because 1 million Puerto Ricans have left the island.
And they continue.
And they will continue till 1 million.
Accelerated rate.
We have New Puerto Rico, Orlando, Florida,
Correct.
right?
So what could we do by December 20th or on December 20th in San Juan like that?
I would continually deny providing anything for them until you can get rid of freaking Trump or somebody that will be interested, or Congress will be interested. You can't pay it. They're not giving them a budget. You're going to have, like you said, you're going to have a new administration. Why? Just like Prepa, everybody changes every 4 years. There's no continuity on anything. And when they win with their party. You know, whatever party wins it, they win all because of una elección. Todo completo en un año. So everybody wins. So if I want to change a local legislation, the governor calls the head of judiciary, change the legislation to apply to their needs, to their contractors, to their people. In the newspaper, I saw as the former governor and the contractor was walking up to see the governor when we got the request for a contract for $17 million. It's my book, by the way, so I'm not making this up. For $17 million to give to a guy because he was Latino and he knew the culture. And then what are you going to do with the $17 million? Don't I need some kind of process, some kind of response to what you're doing? No, 17 million. They said, Nelson, we don't need you. They threw me out and they threw another Latino on the board because we wouldn't vote for them, and those two made the difference. And then they picked their own guys, put the board on, and they get the contract signed. It is a system that's not working for our community over there or our community here. Now, I'm just hoping that the Orlando community, which is different than the community that I came from, which is very poor, very campesino, I would hope that they have more of an intellectual capacity to understand the participation process. I'm just hoping.
That they don't.
I'm hoping. Keep hope alive, you know.
Hope alive.
But you're absolutely right, by the way. You're absolutely right that the solution seems to be insoluble, but the salvation should be the Jones Act. We've paid more taxes, if you add up all the money of the Jones Act, than the $120 billion that we owe. More in taxes since 1917. And why don't want to give it up? Because the unions don't want to give it up, and the business people don't want it too. So how are you, while in St. Thomas, when they had the same problem, they suspended the Jones Act for a year. You know how long they suspended the Jones Act for us?
10 days.
That's right, 10 days. That's how they respect us. And then they put out a ship, a medical ship, outside, and people can't even get to the ship.
No, they gave the wrong telephone number. So how are people supposed to call with no electricity?
That's, you're not noticing. Entonces the mayor who's making all the demands, nobody's seeing her, but everybody's seeing her on CNN here, but nobody's seeing her on the island because there's no electricity. You're absolutely right. And I think we as a community should understand that it is not acceptable.
No, there's a lack of leadership, these inconsistencies and these injustices.
But they don't want you in the island to be involved in that because tú eres un comunista, tú eres un leftista. You know, that's right. That's right. That's right.
So, listen, hold on.
Remember the Young Lords Party? When we were trying the Young Lords Party, and I'm representing them, They said, I'm a communist, because I was representing the Young Lords Party. I mean, they were the only ones at that time defending something that were offshoot of the Black Panthers. And because they were there, eran un montón de comunistas nosotros. I mean, a lawyer, how many of us could, I don't even know what a communist is, let alone that. Pero así era la gente nuestra.
We want to make enough time in the program so that you can, those of you who have the book in hand, can talk to Nelson one-on-one, line up, give him some conversation.
Well, first let me thank
and
you.
everything else.
Thank you for all coming. I've seen a lot of people I haven't seen in many years. I love you all. You all have seen me all these years, but you didn't know all the crap that I went to get here, so thank you.
A big hand for Nelson Diaz.
Thank you, buddy. You did a good job.
You got it.
Really quickly, if anybody, I know there were people who trickled in.